All right, so let's get this barnacle and populate it over the rock. But before we do that, let's try to do it just on a simple plane, just to get a few concepts out of the way. So we'll just jump into FX mode. We'll go to the Create Mesh Network. You could choose Instancer or Mesh. For now, I'm just going to use Instancer. Later down, we might use Mesh. So I'll also open my Mesh editor, so it allows me to quickly jump between attributes here. And you can see when I increase the number of points, right now I currently have it set to 10. It replicates the barnacle 10 times. At the moment, there's no connection between the barnacle and the polyplane. So you can see it's clearly going off the surface. Let's go into the number of points and set it to 300. And you can see 300 points equals 300 barnacles, of course. So now we have a long line of barnacles. And I'm going to set the distribution type to mesh. And under input mesh, I need to plug in the polyplane. And I'll just middle mouse drag it into there, and immediately it populates across the surface. Or actually, what it uses is the word scatter. Now, I'm going to go in here. You can see there's still history connected to this, and I'm going to start adding more geometry on the surface of the plane. And as it does that, if you notice, it's adding more barnacles to that area. That's not unlike certain settings in hair modules where if there's more vertices, it applies more either hair follicles, or in this case, it's applying more. So by turning on the scatter use face area, it evenly distributes it across the surface, which is what we want. Okay. I'm gonna go in here, and I want to show you guys how I create masks to control what areas have barnacles and not. So I'm gonna just throw in create a throwaway shader, in this case just a surface shader, and I'm going to go to the 3D paint tool. I flooded it black, and I'm set the color to white, and I'm just going to draw an X, and I'll create a few little points here and there. I've sometimes had issues with it with surface shader, and if you do have that issue, just use a Lambert. It's easy enough, but this does not work with the V-Ray shader, so make sure you use one of the primitives. You have to save your project so it knows where to store the texture that you create. So just make sure you do that. So I saved out the texture. I'm going to create an add visibility node, and I'm going to go into my hypershade into my textures. And you can see that it has created a file texture there, and I'm going to plug that into the strength map. Now, one thing that's very important, and we're going to talk about this later, is by using a plane, it's going to apply extremely easily. But we're going to have to do a few extra steps once that geometry is more complex than just the plane. And we'll get to that later. But you can see now the barnacles are only appearing in specific areas. Okay, and you could increase the number of points or decrease it, but it's only going to populate those areas. Now, if I were to create a sphere, and let's just delete the visibility node, let's select the distribution node and just replace the plane with the sphere. Instantly, all those barnacles now populate that sphere. So it's extremely simple to replace geometry. As long as you swap them in the distribute node, it'll propagate to whatever you want. Okay, you can see some of them are rotating the wrong way, so I'll just bring up the rotation ramp on the left side. I'll bring down the scale to have more variation in size, and these values can go beyond 1. So even though that's just going to 1, you could put 1.4 and you could see that the barnacles are much bigger. Some of them are interpenetrating, but it's okay because we're gonna see it at such a distance you're not even gonna notice, and it actually might add to the complexity. Okay? So let's just create a light. Let's just do a quick IPR and see what that looks like. Looks pretty cool. Has a lot of complexity, a lot of breakup. So you could have used a normal map for this and sculpted all this in ZBrush or Mudbox, but you would never get that level of complexity. So going back to the rock, let's just come over here, create mesh network. I'm gonna set this to mesh this time instead of instancer. I'm gonna select mesh as the distribution type, drag cliff top, give it a second. We'll increase the number of points to something like 3,000. Give it a second, it's gonna take a minute. It's a lot of geometry. And that geometry will be mesh1 underscore repro mesh. And you can see that it's now scattered across. We're going to turn on scatter use face area so we don't get more geometry in the crevices where there might be more geo. So it'll be evenly distributed. We'll turn off ignore ramps, come down to our actual ramps, and play with the rotation and the scale. Now, it's probably not a bad idea to go in here and lower the amount of points while you do your rotations and your scale. So right now, by bringing both of those up, the rotations will be correct. And we'll play with the scale, bring it up to 5 as the maximum. You can see it's way beyond 1. We could go back to the repro mesh. You can see all the barnacles look nice. Still not enough. We'll bring the scale up to 8. This is another reason why it's better to use normal maps over displacement maps. If this were displaced and you're scaling the model up to 8, it would not look correct because the displacement maps are very dependent on the scale of the model. So let's go up and increase the number of points drastically. So we'll go to 20,000. So there you see we have a lot more. You can see we're already starting to have graphics card issues because of the amount of geo. A lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm recording this, which is taking up a lot of the GPU. So we could add a visibility node, and here I'll just jump into Mudbox real quick. I'll spare you the process, but you could see that I focused certain areas to have the barnacles, so the 20,000 barnacles would only be in specific areas. You can see when it's applied, it does not look right. This is what I was trying to say earlier with the polyplane. So for starters, let's set this to raw. Okay, we have to go into our projection type, our map projection axes, and set it to UV, and then relink the cliff into the visibility node. This doesn't really make much sense to me, but it is what it is. And now you can see that the barnacles are only appearing in the front-facing planes that were painted out or painted in Mudbox. We'll bring this up to 30,000. Okay. Let's set our shading to use default shader so that we see everything gray shaded. And I increased the scale bringing it up to 12 because I really want it to be visible. Okay, so that looks much better. I'm selecting the model. So again, that's Mesh 1 Repro Mesh. And I'll go to Create, V-Ray, Create Proxy. And I'll just name this so ArcStation Barnacle A. I'll create the proxy. Okay, I'll go back to the distribute node. I'll go to the random seed and just really you could type in any number and it's going to change the position of every single one of those barnacles. Go to Create V-Ray, Create Proxy, and export out a different one. So now that would be two separate proxy models that we've exported. So this one we'll call Barnacle B, Create Proxy. I'm speeding through this. It actually takes a little bit longer than it appears. We'll change the random seed. Let's set this to 7. It changes the position of all of them. And we'll export this again. Let's name this Barnacle C. Now we'll go to our distribute node, and under number of points, I'll set this to 1. So you can see there's just one model there. We'll go to import proxy, and we'll start loading in number 1. Now a proxy mesh will not show you full resolution. It just shows little random poly faces. We'll bring in a third. Create. So from this distance it looks like those are the barnacles, but you can see when we get close up, it's just random scattered faces. We'll select those 3 meshes and apply the existing barnacle shader on it, which we haven't really done anything to, but we'll just connect it anyhow. And if we render this right now, you can see there's thousands and thousands of barnacles all over the surface. Since we've created the proxy though, we don't have to carry, 100,000 barnacles inside of our Maya file. It is referencing that V-Ray proxy file. So I'll just go in here, lower the reflection amount. Again, underwater, less reflection. And we could fine-tune this later, but for now, that looks okay.